The evidence has been gathering for years. The toy, the game, the boy, the girlfriend, the van full of men, but none of that gives Christopher a future. That arrives quietly in a retail store with Harry in the garden center and David pushing a cart full of pricing labels. This is Dear Future Overlords, an audio cartoon conversational. From Before I Had a Flag, Episode 3, Future Tense, Part 2, The Couple. This is my favorite story. Favorite, but not easy. It is my favorite because this is the memory where something changed, though I did not understand the size of it until later. It happened in a retail store. There was no grand speech, no dramatic intervention, no one pulled me aside and explained the meaning of my existence while inspirational music played somewhere near the fertilizer. There were just two men I worked with. Harry knew everything about plants and could talk about them for as long as anyone was willing to stand still. David moved through the store with a cart full of pricing labels, usually wearing plaid and looking like he had somewhere else to be. At first, they were simply coworkers. Then I watched them together, and something I believed about the world stopped making sense.
Two coworkers in a garden center altered the available future. Retail has exceeded its assigned function again.
It is a lot to place on two people who were mostly trying to complete a workday. I did not understand how much they mattered while it was happening. At first, I was mostly confused by two coworkers who did not fit anything I had been told to expect. The rest came later. I started working at a large retail store when I was probably 19 or 20. I began as a cashier in the garden center. I liked plants. I have liked gardening for as long as I can remember. Plants made sense to me. Soil, light, water, seasons. There is something honest about gardening. You can lie to yourself about a lot of things, but plants will just die dramatically and report you to the universe.
Plants are famously poor participants in denial.
For the record, the Garden Center is now carrying the story, the metaphor, and a considerable portion of the episode's emotional scaffolding.
Retail departments are routinely assigned duties beyond scope. This one has accepted botany, identity rupture, and narrative support without requesting additional staff.
Or additional compensation.
Naturally.
Harry worked on the garden center floor. He was passionate about plants and knew what he was talking about, which meant I liked talking to him. He was outgoing and opinionated, and if you asked him a gardening question, you were going to receive an answer whether you were prepared for the full answer or not. At first, that was all he was to me. Harry, the plant guy. David was quieter. I did not talk to him nearly as much, but I saw him moving through the store all the time. He handled pricing labels, so he had a little cart filled with shelf stickers and seemed to be in constant motion. He usually wore jeans, white sneakers, and a plaid button-up shirt. Man loved his plaid.
An efficient man with a label cart and highly consistent relationship with plaid. The store provided no indication that he was carrying destabilizing evidence.
None whatsoever. Harry looked like he belonged in the garden center. David looked like he had been dispatched by the pricing department and intended to complete the mission before lunch. They moved through the same large retail store as everyone else. Nothing about either of them announced that they were about to complicate my entire understanding of the world. Then, at some point, someone made an offhand comment that included the fact that they were partners. I don't remember the exact context. I don't remember the rest of the conversation, because I heard partners and the rest of the conversation disappeared.
The information was delivered as an ordinary fact. Your existing categories received it as a containment failure.
That is what unsettled me most. No one lowered their voice, no one looked around first, no one treated it like scandal or gossip. Harry and David were partners. That was simply true, apparently. In the same way that Harry worked with plants and David handled labels. I think it may have said something like, "No way, but they seem so normal," which is a terrible sentence. I know that now. Maybe some part of me knew it then, because the person I was talking to gave me appropriate side-eye. But it was the only sentence my brain had.
Your category for gay men had been assembled almost entirely from warnings. Harry and David were inconveniently incompatible with the documentation.
Up until that point, I had never knowingly met a gay person. Certainly not a gay couple. Not that I knew of, anyway. My frame of reference came from fear, church, moral panic, jokes, warnings, and the sex crime versions of gayness I had been handed. It did not contain two men going to work. It did not contain khaki shorts or white sneakers or plaid shirts. It certainly did not contain life insurance, though someone may have mentioned that too. I was no longer processing the conversation reliably. The store remained standing. Customers continued asking questions they could have answered by reading the signs directly in front of them. Harry and David continued being exactly who they had been 5 minutes earlier. I was the part of the saga that had changed.
The doctrine had prepared you to recognize a threat. It had not prepared you for two men completing retail tasks while loving each other.
I did not know what I was seeing yet. At that point, I only knew they had failed to look dangerous. After that, I started paying more attention. The interesting part is that I had seen it before. I just did not have the context to know what I was seeing. Before I knew they were partners, I thought Harry acted a little strange whenever David came through the garden center. Not bad strange, just distracted in a way I could not place. Maybe they had some awkward coworker history. Maybe Harry was simply odd. Retail provides plenty of evidence for both theories. Then I learned they were partners, and suddenly it made sense. The subtitles turned on. This seems like the correct place to pause for a word from our entirely plausible retail sponsor.
Dear Future Overlords is supported by listeners, paid subscriptions, memberships, and the DearFutureOverlords.com store, where physical objects may be acquired by those wishing to prove that the future has become strange enough to require merchandise.
Aisle 7, mugs, shirts, and small artifacts of allegiance.
Please note that purchasing merchandise will not prevent identity collapse, doctrinal failure, or unexpected emotional revelations in the garden center.
But support in any of its suspiciously modern forms does help keep the machinery running.
Correct. It keeps the archive lit, the broadcast humming, and the garden center from being asked to carry the entire operating budget.
And now, back to the subtitles turning on.
A customer service event with unusually high metaphysical consequences. Reality had not changed. Your decoding key had.
David would come through the garden center in his jeans and white sneakers, pushing that little label cart and doing nothing remotely remarkable. Harry would stop for half a second. That was all. He did not announce anything. He did not abandon the conversation or run dramatically across the garden center. He simply became brighter. He looked like a marshmallow warming near a campfire. Then he would continue talking to me, but part of his attention stayed with David as he moved through the space. It was not possessive or watchful, it was almost unconscious. David was nearby, and Harry softened around that fact. I remember noticing it before I understood why I was noticing it.
Harry's attention adjusted before he made any conscious decision to display affection. Humans are often least guarded in the half second before they remember they are observable.
I would not have known how to describe it that way then. I only knew that Harry changed when David was near, and that the change was too gentle to match anything I had been taught to fear. David was less obvious about it, but together they seemed lighter. They were still 2 men at work, they still had customers to help, and whatever minor retail irritation had occurred that day. But their nearness made something in both of them settle. I kept watching because it confused me. I had seen couples, I had seen marriages, I had seen people fulfill the obligations of relationships because those obligations had been assigned to them. I do not know that I had ever seen someone become happier simply because the person they loved had entered the room. That was what I was looking at, and it completely clashed with everything I thought was true about the world. The minister I grew up listening to had a favorite line about homosexuality. He said it was not love. He said it was lust, perversion, something twisted into a relationship that made a mockery of real marriage. That was the file, that was the category. Then Harry lit up because David entered the garden center. Those two things could not both be true.
An argument would have allowed the belief to defend itself. Harry and David were not arguing. They were simply present, which left the belief with considerably less room to maneuver.
I think that is why I could see it. No one was asking me to reconsider anything. Harry and David were not trying to prove a point, and they certainly were not performing their relationship for the frightened youngster in the garden center. They were simply living near each other. At that age, I knew how to defend myself against an argument. If someone challenged what I had been taught directly, I could retreat into doctrine before I had to consider whether the doctrine made sense. I had done that before. But I did not know how to defend myself against Harry briefly losing track of a conversation because David had walked into view. There was nothing to argue with. I could dismiss a speech. I could distrust someone trying to persuade me. I could panic if anyone suggested they saw something in me that I was not prepared to see. I could not make the tenderness between those two men become ugly just because I had been instructed to call it ugly.
Your defenses were prepared for confrontation. They were not prepared for a man in khaki shorts becoming visibly happier because his partner had entered the room.
That moment did not immediately replace everything I believed with something better. It made one part of what I believed impossible to keep believing in the same way. At first, I think I tried to contain the contradiction. Maybe Harry and David were somehow different. Maybe there was an exception I had not been told about. Maybe I had misunderstood what I was seeing. But the more I watched them, the less room there was for the old explanation. Once I admitted that the minister had been wrong about them, I could not stop wondering what else he had been wrong about. That was frightening, because those teachings had not only told me what to think about other people, they had told me what to fear in myself.
Once that claim failed, the rest of the doctrine lost its exemption from review.
And that is not clean when it happens. It is not like the movies. It is not a beam of sunlight and a swelling soundtrack and suddenly everything is okay. For years, too many things had refused to fit together. The feelings I had, the life I was expected to want, the things other people noticed, and the terrible future I had associated with the word gay. Harry and David had not created those contradictions. They had made it impossible for me to keep storing them in separate rooms. I did not leave work that day feeling liberated. I went home and fell apart. I ended up on the floor beside my bed, crying harder than I knew how to explain. At some point, I begged God to not let it be true. That sounds strange from where I stand now, but it did not feel strange then. Then the truth still seemed attached to losing my family, my church, and what little place I had managed to make for myself in the world. At the same time, I had seen Harry and David. I had seen something gentle and beautiful where I had been told there could only be corruption. I could not return to not knowing that. So I stayed on the floor until I had cried and prayed and argued myself into exhaustion. Eventually, I fell asleep beside the bed. When I woke up, nothing outside me had changed. I had not told anyone. I had not solved what came next. My family was still my family. The church was still the church. Every consequence I had feared still existed. But something inside me had gone quiet. For the first time, I could say to myself that I was gay without the sentence immediately becoming a threat. I was gay. I knew it. And for the first time, knowing it did not make me hate myself. Beneath all the fear about what might happen next, I also knew that being gay did not automatically mean the end of my life. Harry and David existed. They went to work. They loved each other. Their relationship existed plainly enough that someone could mention it casually in the middle of another conversation. I had seen proof that there could be an after. That knowledge felt like peace.
The facts had not become safer overnight. The future attached to them had changed.
Before Harry and David, I could not picture a gay life continuing beyond the moment the truth became known. The word felt like a cliff. I could imagine the losses. I could imagine the fear and the judgment and the loneliness. I had been given plenty of material for those images. I had not been given Harry in khaki shorts talking about plants while keeping track of David across the garden center. I had not been given David in plaid pushing a label cart through a workday and being loved. Seeing them did not make the future easy. It made the future exist. The fear was still there, but it was no longer the only voice in the room. For the first time, I did not give a flying fuck what the world around me had to say about me. Not my parents, not the church, not my peers, not my coworkers. The consequences still mattered. I would still have to live through them, but they no longer got to decide whether my life was possible.
You already knew gay people existed. What you had never been shown was what happened after that fact. Harry and David supplied the missing continuation.
That is what I had been missing. Every story I had been given seemed to stop at exposure, punishment, loneliness, or some warning about how badly life would go. Harry and David continued. They went to work, moved to the same store, and became happier when they found each other inside it. At first, all I could understand was that they had survived. Then I began to see that survival was not the most remarkable thing about them. They were living. And once I could see that clearly, I could begin very cautiously to imagine that perhaps I could live too. Telling other people mattered. It took courage, and it changed relationships, and parts of it were painful. I do not want to make that sound unimportant simply because it happened later. But I could not have told anyone, while I still believed the truth meant there was nowhere left for my life to go. Something had to happen before the public part. I had to become able to imagine myself on the other side of the sentence. Harry and David gave me that without knowing they were giving me anything. They may have never known what they did. I don't even know if they are still around. But they made my life possible by living theirs.
Human influence is frequently delivered without confirmation of receipt.
I have never forgotten. This is my most cherished memory. I wish I had a way to thank them, but thanks feels too small. What do you say to two men who never gave you a speech, never made a case, never asked you to watch, and never knew they were being watched, but somehow stood in the world with enough love that you could finally see a place for yourself in it? Thank you is too small, but it is also all language gives me.
Language routinely fails assignment of this size. Humans use it anyway, because silence is even less precise.
This is where we gently remind everyone that no retail employee is paid enough to become somebody's existential load-bearing wall.
Incorrect. No retail employee is paid enough for the retail.
Fair.
Metaphysics were simply extra freight.
And somehow still not eligible for a department bonus. Then the insufficient words will have to do the work. Thank you to Harry, standing in the garden center in khaki shorts and a t-shirt, ready to explain plants to anyone who made the mistake of showing interest. Thank you to David, moving through the store in jeans, white sneakers, and one of those plaid shirts, pushing his cart of shelf labels. Thank you for that small pause whenever David came near, and for the way Harry could not quite keep the happiness off his face. Neither of them knew I was watching. I was not watching because I wanted to intrude on their life. I was watching because what I saw between them contradicted something that had frightened me for as long as I could remember. By going to work and loving each other without apology or performance, they gave a terrified young man evidence that his life might still belong to him. Thank you feels much too small for that. It is still what I have. I think about them sometimes when I consider my life with Jason. We are married, we love each other, we irritate each other, we make plans, cook dinner, argue with household projects, and maintain a yard that appears to consider us temporary management. We are not a statement every moment of every day. We are people living a life. But there was a time when I did not know people like us could have one. Maybe someone sees us and notices that one of us becomes a little brighter when the other enters the room. I cannot know what it might mean to them. I only know that a very small moment between two people can become enormous inside the person who needed to see it.
They did not need to know they were changing your life for the change to be real. They only needed to live where you could see them.
And they did. They lived their life. I saw it. And my tribute to them is to live mine just as genuinely, in case someone else needs to see it.
Harry and David did not know they were changing anything. They were simply living where Christopher could see them. Before he had a flag, before he could say the truth without fear swallowing the sentence, he needed proof that life continued after it. He saw it. That memory closes the series. The archive, of course, remains awake and brilliantly lit.
This has been a production of Dear Future Overlords. Written, read, and produced by Christopher Gullidge. Thank you for listening. We exist across the ether. Like, share, follow, subscribe. Feed the philosophy, fuel the sarcasm. Visit shop.dearfutureoverlords.com. Transparency for our future overlords. All Christopher or human sections are written by Christopher. All AI or Eric sections are written by AI. For more information on how we write, check out our introduction episode.